Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't hiding in the woods or under your bed. They're behind the wheel of a van, wearing a smile. This is the story of two victims. The first victim, a mother of three, who sadly did not survive. The second, a 15-year-old girl, who did. The second victim not only lived, she helped to finally put the killer behind bars. Let's unpack the details. In 1978, America was a different place. Back then, hitchhiking wasn't just accepted, it was normal. Teenagers would often stand by the roadside with their thumbs out, sometimes holding a piece of paper or card saying something like, "heading south," in the hope that a complete stranger would pull over and offer them a ride. It's with one such hitchhike that our story begins. On the 29th of September 1978, 15-year-old Mary Vincent was standing by the roadside near a place called Modesto in California, United States. She'd previously run away from her home in Las Vegas after her parents' bitter divorce had turned her life upside down. She'd bounced from place to place, staying first with a boyfriend and then with her grandfather. But ultimately time took its toll and she became dreadfully homesick and decided to head back to her home in Las Vegas. So on that day, Mary was stood by the roadside with two other hitchhikers. She was tired, she was hungry, she was just a teenager trying to make her way home. All three of them were hoping to get a ride in the same direction. And suddenly they felt their luck was in. A blue van pulled over. Mary ran up to the passenger side of the van and the guy wound the window down. He introduced himself as Lawrence Singleton. He looked like he was in his early 50s, he was going a bit bald, but he seemed harmless enough, even friendly. In fact, he reminded Mary a little bit of her grandfather. He had quite a large van, with plenty of room in the back. But strangely, he told Mary that he could only give her a lift on her own. He couldn't take the other two. You would think that this might set alarm bells off in her head. She thought about it for a moment, but decided the pull of getting home was too much, and she went back and told the other hitchhikers what the situation was. They actually warned her, "Don't get in the van with this guy, something just seems a little bit off." But in spite of that, Mary was determined. She just wanted to get home. She climbed into the passenger seat with the belongings that she had, and the van pulled away. Little did Mary know that this journey was going to change her life forever. At first, Singleton just made casual small talk. He told Mary that he'd been a merchant seaman once and that he had a daughter around about her age. Mary steadily grew comfortable and began to let her guard down a bit. They stopped off very briefly and she even helped him load what appeared to be some laundry into the van. But tiredness overtook her as the journey went on and she just dozed off. When she awoke, things had changed. They were not heading south anymore towards Las Vegas. They appeared to be heading east into some sort of wilderness area. And Mary immediately sat up, alarmed, and told Singleton, "You're heading the wrong way. What's going on?" Singleton acted confused. He said, "I'm sorry, I must have just missed a turn. Don't worry, I'll turn back and get us on the right road again." And in fact, he did this. He turned around and started heading in the right direction. Because he turned round, Mary calmed a little bit. But inside, something was telling her to stay alert. As they drove on, they were in the middle of nowhere, remember. Singleton said that he had to go to the bathroom and he would need to pull over. And so he pulled off into a side road near a place called Del Puerto Canyon. He got out, on the face of it, just for a bathroom break, and Mary, the same, got out to stretch her legs. And in doing so, she noticed that one of her shoelaces was undone, and she bent down to tie it up. She would later think that this may have actually saved her life at that stage. As she bent down to tie her lace, she felt the crack of something hard against the back of her skull. Without her noticing, Singleton hadn't actually gone for a bathroom break. He'd crept around the van, up behind her with a sledgehammer, and he'd hit her from behind. Mary collapsed unconscious. Eventually Mary came to, and when she did, she found herself in the back of the van. She was completely naked. She was tied up and she was in unimaginable pain. As time wore on into the night, Singleton forced her to do unimaginable things. First of all, he forced her to perform an oral sex act on him. He then began to force her to drink alcohol, which he'd also been drinking himself, and throughout the night he raped her repeatedly. Eventually he seemed to get tired and he got back out of the van, went round to the front seat, got in and fell asleep. As the sun rose, Mary felt herself being cut free from some of the ropes that were pinning her down in the van, and she felt herself being dragged out of the back of the van. She begged Singleton to let her go and not hurt her anymore. She said, "Please let me free, I won't tell anyone what's happened." And that was when he said some fateful words. He said, "You want to be set free? I'll set you free." As Mary lay on the ground, Singleton went to the back of his van and came back holding a hatchet. He towered above her and reached down and grabbed her left wrist with his left hand. And then he swung the hatchet. It came down once, twice, maybe 3 times. He did this until her left arm was severed completely just below the elbow. He then grabbed her right arm and did the same with this, severing the arm again just below the elbow with the hatchet. By this stage, of course, Mary was in absolute shock and even more agony. But she felt a little bit strange. She felt herself fall back away from Singleton, and yet she saw her arm still with him. And what she didn't realise was that when he'd grabbed her left arm, she'd also gripped onto his arm. And when he'd severed her left arm, the grip meant that her left arm was still attached to him, and he was now trying to shake it off. By this stage, Mary was drifting into unconsciousness, and Singleton thought she was either dead or pretty close to it. There was a 30-foot drop-off at the side of the road, down to a drainage culvert. The first thing he did was threw her almost lifeless body off the side of the road, 30 feet down. He then went down into the ravine himself and shoved her body into the concrete drainage culvert, just leaving her there to bleed out and die. He then went back up into the van and drove away. But remarkably, Mary didn't die. She came to and remembered what had happened, and she knew she had to stop the bleeding in some way. So she shoved the ends of her arms into the dirt and mud to try and cover them with mud to staunch the bleeding. I can't even believe that she did that. It must have been so painful. As she desperately got to her feet, she then remembered something her mother told her about when a cut was bleeding. "Hold it above your head," her mother had said. So she raised both of her arms vertically to try and lose as little blood as possible. Somehow she managed to climb her way out of the ravine and get back onto the road. An absolutely tremendous feat considering the injuries she was enduring. And then, naked, broken and bleeding, she walked. And she walked on for 3 miles until she hit the main road again. The first car that came upon her was a Corvette, but it didn't stop. The occupants must have been alarmed at what they saw and they just sped away. Mary later realised that she must have looked like something out of a horror movie. Eventually a second car came by, and this time a young couple that were in the car stopped. They got out and helped Mary. In fact, they wrapped her in towels and put her in the car to take her to try and get some help. They drove to a local airport where they were able to alert the emergency services, and paramedics were soon on the scene and took Mary into care. When she reached hospital, she was taken into surgery immediately, and somehow the girl survived. Despite all of the trauma, she stayed awake long enough to give the police a detailed description of her attacker. The description was so accurate that the sketch coming from it was quickly identified by one of Singleton's neighbours, who reported him to the police. And shortly afterwards, he was arrested and charged with her assault. 6 months after the assault, Mary faced Singleton at his trial in court. By this stage, he was wearing prosthetic arms. Throughout the trial, Singleton tried to make up some cock and bull story. He said that Mary was a sex worker and she tried to blackmail him. But when Mary took the stand, she raised up her prosthetic arms and showed the jury, and then she explained in graphic detail exactly what the man had done to her. Singleton was convicted of rape, kidnapping and attempted murder. At the time, the maximum sentence he could receive in that particular area was 14 years. This was the maximum allowed by California law. But the presiding judge was so shocked by the horrific nature of Singleton's crimes, they said that if they had the power, Singleton would have gone to jail for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, 14 years was all they could give him. After he was jailed, Mary Vincent went into hiding, but she did take out a civil suit against him, and she was awarded $2.56 million. Sadly, she would never see a penny of this money because Singleton, in or out of jail, was unemployed and only had about $200 to his name. This case became notorious, not just because of the brutal nature of what Singleton had done, but because of what happened after he was sentenced and went to jail. He basically behaved himself. He even became a teaching assistant within the jail. Because of his good behaviour, he was eventually paroled after just 8 years served. People were completely shocked. And of course, Mary Vincent was horrified to know that this man who'd attacked her in this way was being released. Her fears had been exacerbated by the fact that when he was sentenced, she'd had to walk past him in the courtroom, and as she did, he'd murmured under his breath, "One day I'll finish the job if it's the last thing I do." Naturally, Mary was in fear of her life. Once he was released, Singleton had grave difficulty finding somewhere to live. Nobody wanted him living in their area. He had become notorious, and everywhere he went there were protests and people just basically tried to hound him out of town. He tried to live in various places, but eventually he had to live in a trailer in the grounds of San Quentin prison. He couldn't go anywhere else, and he lived there for about a year until his parole period was up. At the end of that time, he decided enough was enough, and he moved out of the area. He in fact moved back to his native Florida, Tampa to be specific. And there he stayed for some time, eventually blending into the surroundings. Some of his neighbours didn't even know who he was. But he didn't stay completely out of trouble. In 1990, he was twice convicted of theft. In the spring of that year, he served a 60-day sentence in jail for stealing a $10 disposable camera. Later that same year, he was convicted of the theft of a $3 hat, and this time he was given a 2-year sentence. At his trial, he told a judge, "I'm just confused, I'm just an old man." Throughout his time back in Tampa, he had been drinking heavily. On February the 19th, 1997, he invited 31-year-old Roxanne Hayes, a local sex worker, back to his house, paying her something in the region of $10 to $20. Roxanne was a mother of 3, and basically she was just trying to get through life and survive. Later that day, 2 local guys came to Singleton's house. They were painters and decorators. Singleton had engaged them to come and do some work at his house, but he'd obviously forgotten. They couldn't get any answer at the front door, so they went to another door which they found open, and one of the guys went in. The scene he found was horrific. He came upon Singleton standing naked, covered in blood, and then he saw the body of a woman lying on the sofa. She was also covered in blood, and it looked like she'd been stabbed multiple times. The decorator ran out of the house and ran back to his colleague. But strangely, instead of calling police there and then, they left the scene. But eventually they did pull over and alert police. And when police arrived on the scene, they found Singleton still there, and they found Roxanne's dead body. She'd been stabbed 7 times. They immediately arrested Singleton on suspicion of murder. He said that she had attacked him first. Singleton would subsequently be charged and be sent for trial. Mary Vincent came out of hiding and would return to testify against him. Singleton was convicted of Roxanne's murder. The evidence against him was completely damning, and Mary Vincent was present for his sentencing. She once again stood in court 20 years later and told her story to the jury. She raised her prosthetic arms and showed them to the jury, but this time she wasn't just speaking for herself, she was also speaking for Roxanne. On the 14th of April 1998, the judge handed down a death sentence to Lawrence Singleton, and he was taken away to jail to await his fate. But he would never face execution. In 2001, he died in prison of cancer. He was 74 years old. Now, some people might think that justice wasn't fully served because he wasn't executed. But one thing that did come from Mary Vincent's ordeal was a change in the law. California passed what became known as the Singleton Bill. Now, this covered crimes of the nature that Mary had had to endure. But what it said was that where torture was involved, the minimum sentence could be given as 25 years to life. And that sentence would have no possibility of early release. This would have been, I think, in my opinion, a far more fitting sentence for Lawrence Singleton. Had he have received that sentence, Roxanne might still be alive. And Mary Vincent went on to rebuild her life. She married and became a mother. And against all the odds, having lost both of her arms, she found that she had a talent for art, and she became a well-known artist. From that moment on, she used both her art and her voice to advocate for the victims of violent crime. She still had nightmares, but she began to sleep a little easier, knowing that the monster who had hurt her so badly could never hurt anyone again. Now, at the end of this sad, sad story, our thoughts obviously are with Mary Vincent, considering the horrendous nature of the crime that she endured. And our condolences go out to the family and friends of Roxanne Hayes, who sadly lost her life. And on that note, I'll ask you to stay curious and stay safe. And thank you for watching.